Hello and welcome to On the Line, brought to you by Radio Taiwan International. I'm Carlson Wang. Kiribati is an island nation in the Central Pacific Ocean, and it comprises 33 atolls and reef islands. ROC Taiwan and the Republic of Kiribati established diplomatic relations in 2003, and the two countries have had various cooperation projects for many years. If you have not heard of Kiribati, I'm sure you have heard of the climate change. Some say Kiribati will disappear from the map in the next few decades. But before it does, one man put Kiribati on the map, on the world map in 2008 by attracting the international attention that Kiribati may become uninhabitable by 2050. His remark in June 2008, I quote, "Kiribati may already have reached the point of no return. To plan for the day when you no longer have a country is indeed painful, but I think we have to do that," unquote. And today we have the privilege to be joined by this gentleman, the president of Kiribati, President Anote Tong. President Anote Tong, thank you very much for coming to our studio today, and welcome to On the Line.
Well, thank you for having me, and I always welcome the opportunity to share the story of my people.
Now, before we start to talk about the climate change, can we begin with the bilateral relations between ROC Taiwan and Kiribati? How strong are the relations now?
Well, as you said, we started off our relations in 2003. In fact, in the month of November, this very month. And so this marks the 13th anniversary of our relations. But since 2003, we've seen a lot of interaction between our two countries. A lot of development cooperation has been ongoing between our two countries. And Taiwan has been one of our major development partners, developing not only our human resources, but also engaging in a number of areas, including the health sector, the education, the development of our infrastructure, and also in the area of renewable energy. At the moment, as of last year, we started a process of taking solar energy to the Out Islands. And today I was recently in one of the Out Islands, and all of the homes in the Out Islands are lit by solar lanterns. And this has been done through the cooperation program with Taiwan. So we do have a number of very, very significant projects between our two countries.
So apart from health and solar energy, what other cooperation projects are there between Taiwan and Kiribati?
Well, we have a very significant human resources development in terms of education. We have a number of young people studying in Taiwan universities, and some have gone back and have become leading citizens. And so in that respect, the expertise of Taiwan is actually being a part of the transformation process in our society. And so it has made a significant impact.
Mm-hmm. When the world thinks of Kiribati, it's always associated with the climate change issue, the rising of the sea level and salination. How serious is the effect of climate change in Kiribati?
Well, let me begin by giving a short story, maybe a brief overview of our geography. Our islands, as you said, are low-lying atoll island countries. On average, about 2 meters above sea level, maybe even lower than that. And the islands are very fragile, not a great deal of landmass. And so what we have been experiencing over the years, and what much more recently, has been the severe inundation of the coastline. A number of communities have had to leave their villages in order to survive, so they have to move to other parts of the island. Last year and this year, we had some very high tides. We've not experienced that before. And so there was flooding on a scale that was quite unprecedented. And of course, at the beginning of this year, we had Cyclone Pam, which hit the South Pacific Islands of Vanuatu, and it swamped all of Tuvalu, and it also swamped our two southernmost islands. We never and do not have cyclones, but this is a new event, and so we are perhaps seeing a change in the weather pattern. So our islands have been able to survive in the past because we don't get cyclones, but that is changing, And so quite apart from the sea level rise, we are also experiencing some more severe storms than we had ever experienced in the past.
So Cyclone Pam was not expected by Kiribati.
We don't have cyclones. We create cyclones because we're on the equator. And if you know your geography, then the doldrums which are on the equator, the storms are created, but they go either north or south. But on this occasion, they did go south, but came back into a region that they'd never, ever gone to before. And so it's a new event. It's created a lot of fear within our community. And the waves coming over the island and destruction of homes, we are still recovering, is something that our people had never seen before.
Yes, indeed. The climate change in the Pacific report in 2011 described Kiribati as having a low risk of cyclones. However, as Mr. President, you mentioned in March of this year, Kiribati experienced flooding and destruction of seawalls, and that's very serious, and that's the effect of climate change, I believe.
Well, I'm not the scientist, and I don't want to pretend to be a scientist, but the scientists have made their predictions. What we are experiencing is different. What we are experiencing is perhaps an earlier manifestation of what they've been saying. So if it is climate change, then it's happening much sooner than perhaps even the scientists predicted. But I've always been reluctant to pretend to be a scientist. But what we are seeing are events which we never experienced in the past. Whether they are a product of the global warming and sea level rise, I really don't know. But we are seeing events which we never experienced in the past.
Mr. President, you have been addressing the issue of climate change for so many years right now. Have you seen any positive results?
Well, let me go back to the beginning of my advocacy on climate change. And it began with my coming into office, and the first statement that I delivered at the United Nations General Assembly made reference to climate change in 2004. And every year since I had done that. But of course, the real impact of what's likely to come was not fully realized by the global community until the fourth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2007. And so after 2007, I began to get truly worried because the predictions were very serious for us. And so I took a much stronger position. And of course, in 2009, what we witnessed in Copenhagen was extremely disappointing. It remained a political issue. It remained an issue of economic development, economic growth, and there was never any focus on the human dimension of climate change. And so here we are on the very front line of the impacts of climate change. And I had to tell the world that not only the polar bears are at risk, but people, real people in our part of the world are at risk. And so the question is that you asked, has there been any change? Yes, I've seen a radical change since Copenhagen. A lot of countries that went to Copenhagen came with a very different position than what they are saying today.
That was back in 2007?
2009.
2009.
Because we had that conference in 2009 in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And a lot of countries came there with a very different agenda. What we are seeing today is very different. Last year, at the end of last year, we had the United States together with China making a commitment. We've seen quite a significant commitment by countries, quite recently, including Taiwan, to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So there is that radical change. But the question remains, are we going to be able to actually commit ourselves to implementing and actually achieving those targets? And the next question is, with those targets, can we be assured that the planet remains to have a future? And of course, the question for us, will I be able to go back from the COP meeting, the conference in Paris in December this year? Will I be able to go back to my people and say, you have no problem. The global community is now committed to ensuring that you will have a home in the next generation and the generation after.
Mm-hmm. Well, in December this year, you mentioned that all the negotiators around the world were gathered at a United Nations conference aimed at creating a binding agreement for countries of the world to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions. And Mr. President, what is your goal?
Well, as I said, my goal is to be able to go back and reassure my people that the global community, because it is the responsibility of the global community. There is no question about it. We continue to argue amongst ourselves that the countries which are focused on their own national priorities about economic development, and so they find it difficult to cut their emissions to a reasonable level. And the reason being that it would affect their economies. Now, that is not a realistic argument. It's not, there is no justice. Because if only you would keep your emissions, you have the right to declare your national priorities. But if it is the case that in so declaring your national priorities, you are undermining the future of other countries, then the countries whose future you are undermining have the right to question what it is you're doing in terms of your emissions. And so I think that is the right that we believe we have, and I think that is the obligation of all countries to ensure that what they do does not result in the demise of other countries. And this is what we are seeing at the moment. When we go to Paris, we will continue to put forward our national priorities agenda, but we've got to think as responsible global citizens.
We do hope that every conference will not turn out to be a dining and whining party. And what do you think that they will achieve at this conference in December?
Well, for a start, I hope that leaders, when they go to Paris, will not come there as prime ministers, presidents, or whatever of their own country, but they will go there as world leaders of the global community, determined and committed to ensuring that this planet does not suffer, and the people, that each and every community has a future, that nobody is going to be left behind. It's not about saying, I'm safe with my family, but let me not worry about my neighbors. That is not fair.
Now, Mr. President, would you say that your remark actually back in 2008 took it to the international stage? Let me again quote it. Kiribati may already have reached the point of no return, adding that to plan for the day when you no longer have a country is indeed painful, but I think we have to do that. And that remark for the first time took to the international stage. How did you do that?
Well, it's I don't have a choice, because we've got to be very brutally realistic, because we cannot be beating around on an issue like this when it means the future of our people. It means the future survival of our people. And I don't think we can afford to be diplomatic. It's not something that we can talk about as a negotiation, as a political issue. It's about the survival of people. And so I have to be realistic. I've got to be hard, but it's obviously not hard enough to be able to swing the opinion of people who need to act. No one country can deal with climate change on their own. It's got to be a collective effort. It's got to be everybody putting in. And so this is why it's so important that the message is communicated, but more importantly, that the message and the story behind the message is acted upon. I think many leaders are now talking about climate change, but we need action. We need real action to ensure that what we fear will happen does not happen.
Back to Kiribati, have you met with some specialists with the Netherlands and other flood-prone regions about how to best protect Kiribati?
Yes, I've been going around different parts of the world. I went to the people from the Netherlands have visited my country. I've been to Korea. They have also visited, because we are desperately trying to identify credible, sustainable solutions to our future. In other words, we have to raise our islands because, as I said earlier, and I think you quoted me, no matter what happens in Paris, whether the emission levels agreed will be zero, because of the greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere, the momentum of that will continue to ensure that our islands will be submerged. And so we have to begin to plan for options. And so what options do we have if the sea level is rising, if the storms are going to get more severe? We have to raise the islands. And so if we are going to be able to continue to live there, and so we will have to raise the islands, and we need expertise. The Dutch of course, are have the most experience. I know what they have done in the United Arab Emirates. We are talking with the United Arab Emirates, and so we hope that we can come up with solutions very soon. In the event that Paris does not deliver, we are already embarking on a different path, because climate change is not an issue that we can put all our eggs in one basket on. Because if it fails, as I fear it may well do, then we cannot accept the option that we have no second or fallback position. And so we have a number of options. One of the options that I'll be discussing here during my visit here in Taiwan is an initiative to raise, it's the Pacific Rising. What it is getting together with similar countries in the similar situation in the Pacific and beyond. And so it's a coalition of atoll island nations on the front line of climate change. And this includes Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, Kiribati. We have another not independent state, but a country like ours, Tokelau, and of course the Maldives. So we have been working together to see if there would be countries, partners, who would be willing to make a contribution to our adaptation measures outside of the normal United Nations system. And so we have developed that initiative, and we'll be launching it. I'll be speaking on it during my visit here, but we will be launching it together as a group in Paris. And so this would involve trying to encourage countries, multilateral, bilateral, private donors, private foundations, the philanthropy who may be willing and able to make a contribution, because we want to put on the table that these are the solutions to our problem. And if you think you can make a contribution, we would welcome it and we would thank you.
So Taiwan can also help in this regard, and you've been talking to people here in Taiwan.
Well, Taiwan has already been making a contribution, one of the few countries that has done that. And indeed, there's a great deal of capacity here in Taiwan to make that contribution. And so we will be looking forward to engaging not only the government, but also your private sector.
Mm-hmm. And you have actually visited the Penghu Islands, selected to be the first place to implement low-carbon islands project. And what do you think after visiting this island?
Well, I think it's extremely inspiring that there is that will and capacity to do it. We wish that other countries would do this, and maybe the rest of Taiwan would maybe do the same thing. But as I said, it's cutting down on emissions is about mitigation. We're in the process of adapting, and so I think our focus will be more on adaptation. Mitigation is important, as I said. We will continue to do that, but our most immediate concern will be about staying out of the rising sea level, staying out of the storms, keeping our people safe.
Other option that you mentioned is migration with dignity. Mr. President, could you talk about this plan that you have had for so many years?
Well, as I said, I cannot put my 100% total trust in one option. And so what I've done is keep the options open as much as possible, just in case one falls. And so we have a fallback position. As I said, what we need to do in order to survive in the next generations is to be able to stay out of the water. In order to do that, we need to raise the islands. In order to raise the islands, we need a lot of technical capacity. We need a lot of resources. The question that I ask is, will the resources required be adequate to ensure that our entire population will be able to stay out of the water? And my answer would be, just in case it doesn't happen, we must prepare ourselves for the next best option. And the next best option is to move our people. If not our entire population, maybe a significant part of the population. In order to do that, we've got to be able to convince the countries that they would go to that these are not people that would be a burden to their societies, but would be people that are trained, skilled, and would be able to make a contribution. What I'm suggesting is a win-win situation, whereby if and when our people do migrate to other countries, they will do so with dignity as skilled people.
Kiribati has purchased 5,000 acres of land in nearby Fiji. Could you elaborate on that, Mr. President?
Well, it's, and I know I was criticized for doing that, but I must say that I have to explore all options, including the most radical, because we don't have a lot of choices. And I cannot afford to be too rational in a situation which is calling for unconventional solutions. And so the purchase of the land initially was an investment. I believe that spending $9 million in buying land in Fiji is in itself an investment. I have no doubt that if we decided to sell that piece of land again soon or in the years ahead, we would get more than what we paid for. But I think what is more important is part of the statement that we had been making. In 2008, we declared 400 square kilometers of our ocean as a marine protected area. It's very fertile fishing grounds.
The Phoenix Islands.
The Phoenix Islands. And so we did that to make a statement to the global community that we have to do something. We are running out of options. And so the purchase of the land in Fiji was part of that. It will also provide an opportunity for food security in the event that we will get seriously inundated. But I think more importantly, and I do want to make this statement, put it on record for everybody to hear, that in the process, the Fiji government and the Fiji people have responded and they have made a commitment. They said, "Oh, Mr. President, if ever Kiribati should need somewhere to go in the event that their lands, their homeland is submerged, Fiji would be willing and ready to accommodate them." So that is the most powerful statement, the kind of commitment that I've been looking for from the global community, but not coming. And so I hope what Fiji has committed itself to doing will be something that will trigger the conscience and the compassion of other countries.
But that was very, very touching because it first came from Fiji. But as we discussed, even if some world leaders have indicated that they would be willing to take in Kiribati's climate change refugees if necessary, do you think their citizens will let them do so? If we look at the current example of what happened in Europe regarding the refugees that come from Syria.
Okay. Well, let me first of all correct it. I've always rejected the notion of refugees. And this is why I've always been referring to our relocation, the relocation of our people as migration with dignity. And why I am saying this at this early stage is because we know that this is coming. And so we must plan for it. Rather than wait for it to become a crisis, like what is happening in Europe at the moment. That is a crisis. It was not planned and cannot be managed. What I'm saying is let's begin the process today and let's prepare our people so that if and when they do need to relocate, then it would be as painless as can be possible.
Back to what you mentioned earlier about the Fiji island, the land that you bought near Fiji. How is it compared to the Phoenix Island protected area? Because the land purchased by Kiribati will be used for agricultural and fish farming projects, as you mentioned earlier, for the food security.
Well, the land in Fiji is a very fertile land, much more fertile than our islands, because our islands are atoll islands, coral mostly, so very alkaline, and the soil is very alkaline, not very good for farming. And so the potential for the land in Fiji to be able to supply our food requirements in the future is very good. And so that in itself, it's, as I said, it is an investment. What we have done in the Line Islands is also an investment. So that, because at the beginning of this year, we closed the Phoenix Islands protected area from any commercial fishing activity. And of course, our fishing partners are not entirely happy. But I think what is important is we must be able to fish today, fish in the next generation, and fish in the generation after. And so that is why we are doing this. Because what is happening now with the climate change, the sea level rise, the global warming, is because we did not do these kind of things in the past. Because all of the decisions, the consequences of which we are now bearing, is because we were not there to make those decisions. These decisions were taken in the boardrooms in the United States, in the boardrooms in Europe. And so we are now having to deal with the consequences. So doing what we have done with the Phoenix Islands protected area is doing what we believe will ensure our future, for our future generations.
Mr. President, in March 2014, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published an assessment report, and it says that within a few decades, small islands in the Pacific and Indian Oceans risk being submerged. What is your view on this?
Oh, I think my view is that may even be very conservative, because we are seeing events. You know, just in the last few years, I've visited communities where the villages where they're residing, seawater has come into the freshwater pond. It's damaged all of the food crops, and also the water supply, because we get our water from underground. And so it's damaging their way of life. And I do see that in the very near future, between 5 and 10 years, they would have to leave their villages, because it will no longer be able to support life.
You have attracted international attention by warning that Kiribati may cease to exist due to the rising sea level and salination that we mentioned earlier by climate change. Now, do you have any systematic plans like to raise the awareness of the international community to tell the world that Kiribati may cease to exist?
Well, I'm not saying what I believe. I'm saying what I'm hearing from the science. Okay, I'm simply interpreting the science, or it's not a personal interpretation of my own making. What I'm doing is taking a very realistic analysis of what the science is saying, and translating it into what its implications on the future of our people. I think it's very simple. I think the problem that we are facing is the international community is not listening to the science, because they believe they can afford to carry on, because to do otherwise, to respond to the science, would affect their lifestyles. It's inconvenient, but the reality is, for those countries on the front line, the most vulnerable, it's not about lifestyle, it's just about future security, future survival. And I've been trying to communicate this. Recently we had a meeting of the Pacific Islands Forum, and of course we had member countries who were more concerned about their industries. But my comment was this: it's not about our industries surviving, it's about our people surviving.
It's about the survival of the people,
it's about the
not economy only.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And how can Taiwan's experience in conserving energy and reducing carbon emissions help Kiribati to reduce its reliance on the energy imports from other countries?
Well, Taiwan is indeed a very innovative country. It's something I admire about your people is you find solutions where they don't appear to exist. And this is what we have to challenge ourselves to be able to do. We've got to be innovative. And I think Taiwan has got that capacity. And quite apart from reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, as I said, no matter if we achieve zero carbon emissions, our islands will continue to go underwater. That is the science. And so I'm trying to envision how we should react, what would be the future of my children, my grandchildren. And I think there are options. I know that in the midst of challenges, there are always opportunities. And I'd like to think that in the midst of this challenge, we must explore options that perhaps we never looked at before. And in there, hopefully, there are opportunities to ensure that our future survival can be assured.
Mm-hmm. You said in an interview on CNN in June 2014, whatever is agreed within the United States today with China, the two largest sources of CO2 emissions, it will not have a bearing on our future because already it's too late for us. Mr. President, in your view, is it too late?
It's not my view. Again, let me reassure you, I'm just interpreting the science, because that is what the science is saying. But for me, I've got to interpret it into policy level. I've got to interpret it in such a way that it becomes meaningful to ensure the safety of my people. And so my interpretation is very clear, and it's based on the science that's been coming forward by the IPCC. And so what the report says is within the decade, within the century, within the next few decades, our islands will be underwater. And so we've got a plan now. And so I'm not saying anything new. All I'm saying is trying to define our response to what the science is predicting.
You have won a number of awards recognizing your contribution on climate change. The 2012 Peter Benchy Ocean Award, Hillary Laureate Award, the honorary doctorate degree in engineering from the National Pyeongchang University in Korea. Mr. President, what do you think of all these achievements?
No, I'm grateful for these awards, but always my expectation is these awards would make a contribution to the advocacy. And I'm sure they have made a contribution, and I'm grateful for that. But I think the final goal is to get the international community to listen. And the ultimate goal is to get the international community to act, to do something about it. Because, as I said, in 2004 onwards, nobody was talking about climate change. Nobody was listening to what I was saying on climate change. But now, you go to the United Nations, you listen. Everybody, every leader, almost every leader, is talking about climate change. But still, there is no concrete action. And this is what we need. We don't need people to be saying, making fashionable comments about climate change. We need the global community to act on this.
So we do hope that the world leaders of climate change will have a concrete action when they meet again in Paris in December this year. And we have been joined in our studio today by the President of Kiribati, President Anote Tong. Mr. President, thank you very much for coming to our studio today.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to tell my story and the story of my people. Thank you.
Thank you.